6 years ago, I was working in biotech venture capital, and I didn't believe in energy. I didn't believe in ritual. I definitely didn't believe in shamanism. And honestly, I didn't believe in most of the things that I'm going to talk about today. And if I think back to myself at that time, I would have I would have never believed that I would be where I am right now, doing what I'm doing right now. That version of me 6 years ago would have thought that everything that I'm doing is just absolutely insane. And yet, here I am. And the reason that I'm here doing the work that I'm doing, instead of sitting in an office in Silicon Valley somewhere, is it's not really so much about plant medicine. That's part of it, but the core of it is really a lot more fundamental. It's really about the human body and about what I have experienced and learned and remembered about our humanity and our physicality and our body, and what it means to be here in a human body, and what a beautiful piece of sacred technology that we walk around with every day. And that is really the core of what I'm passionate about, and really changed my reality around healing and around experience and just what it means to be human. So before I started this work, actually when I started plant medicine work for my own journey, for my own healing, I was working in biotech venture capital, as I said. And that world taught me so much about the nature of the, I would say, like, false reality, matrix reality that we live in. A lot of people talk about this, right? Like the matrix. And that is not Earth, right? That's not your body. That's not Earth. That's not physicality. That's not really the matrix. Not as I see it anyway. What I experience as the matrix is this false reality that we as humans have created with our minds, and only exists because we collectively agree that it exists. And being in venture capital, I really got to see how money flows, right? And how finances flow. Our financial system, and I think a lot of people think I'm crazy when I say this, but our financial system isn't real. It's not real. It's not truth. It's real because we collectively agree that it's real. But the reality is that our financial system has been built on extraction, the energy and the action of extraction from the earth, and then creating things that in many times are actually anti-life. And so when you think about biotech and you think about creating therapies for different diseases and things like that, it sounds really good. And I mean, in ways it is. I still, I believe in science. I believe in technology. I believe in innovation. I believe it's really important. But the reality of our current financial system and how investments are made is not in what is going to be in the highest benefit of the people that are being served, what is in the highest benefit of life. The reality is that what gets invested in is what is going to make money, what is marketable, what's going to have the highest return on investment. And oftentimes what's going to have the highest return on investment doesn't actually have anything to do with the benefit that it's actually going to bring to the people who are taking that medication or receiving that treatment. And it didn't take me long to see that this is kind of how things work. And I do have to say that, the organizations that I worked for when I was in this world, they were actually pretty good. I was actually getting to work with people who really were passionate about innovation. And so there was definitely more of a balance there than in a lot of the venture capital world. But, regardless, when you're in that world, it is about return on investment at the end of the day. You cannot be a successful venture capitalist if you're not having a return on investment. And the way that our whole financial system and our whole healthcare system is set up puts a lot of restraints on what can have a return on investment that is worth investing in. And, what I realized in all of this is that we all live in a society that has been built on what we would call a colonized mind. And what I mean by a colonized mind is a mindset, a reality that has been disconnected from the wisdom of the body and the wisdom of the earth. We do everything from here. All of our energy is up here. And this and what this says is the only thing that matters. And I lived in that world. I lived very strongly in it. And I listened to my mind, and I did what was logical and rational. And I still consider myself to be a very logical and rational person. But there was no balance. And, this world that we live in, there's no balance. And it's almost like there is this mind virus that has told us that the earth is something that it needs to be mastered, it needs to be controlled, it needs to have resources extracted from it. The same thing from the body. The body needs to be mastered, it needs to be controlled. And it is here to serve the desires of the mind, right? What our mind would like to create. And that's not it. That's not balance. And it is extremely, extremely harmful, extremely, extremely toxic. And I don't think I know anybody who hasn't been impacted by this, I don't know that there is anybody that hasn't been impacted by this. Even tribes that live out in the middle of the jungle and have no contact with the rest of reality, they still are impacted by this because of climate change and everything that's, happening in their environment that they're not necessarily contributing to, but that is still happening because of, it's, to me, it's like this mind virus that's taken over most of humanity, that's disconnected us from the wisdom of the physicality that we're in, and telling us that this thing between our ears knows what's best all of the time. And so, being in venture capital, right, in biotech venture capital, in this reality that says, oh, we're developing treatments for disease, what I very clearly started to see was that we're developing treatments for diseases that wouldn't exist if we lived in right relationship with ourselves and with the earth. All of these chronic diseases, how sick people are all over the place in the Western world, it just wouldn't be that way if we actually took care of ourselves the way that our bodies want to be cared for, the way that they're meant to be cared for. If we saw ourselves as part of the earth and treated ourselves as part of the earth, which we are. Yeah. And so this whole process was just very enlightening for me. And even in the early days of my work in venture capital, like, I knew that it wasn't something I was going to do long term. I would have never guessed that I would be doing this, the work that I'm doing now. But I always knew that it wasn't really in alignment with my values and what I cared about. But it was the path that I was that appeared before me, and so I walked down it, and I'm glad that I did, because it taught me a lot about the nature of the reality that we live in, and where large amounts of resources flow at a higher level. And so this process of going from that to what I'm doing now, even though I wasn't like fully committed and connected to what I was doing in that world, I didn't believe in any of the stuff that we're doing now. I believed in plant medicine, in that plants can cause you to have experiences that enhance neuroplasticity, right? I believed in neuroplasticity, and I've always had a deep connection with plants. And so if someone tells me that I can like heal something with a plant, I'm like, sign me up, right? So those are the things that I believed in. But this multidimensional nature of our reality, this spiritual aspect of our beingness, and of this reality that we lived in, I thought all of that was completely bananas and woo-woo. And so this was really like a big transition for me that happened over like a relatively short period of time, given the amount that changed. And also given that I had embedded myself in this world that also is highly valued by the external world, right? It's like very externally reinforced when you work in this kind of field and you're making lots of money and you're contributing to something that people believe is really doing good for the world, right? When you're developing treatments for cancer, right? And that is a good thing. It's not that that's not a good thing, but the reality is that so much cancer is caused because we are not present in our bodies. We're not listening to our bodies. We're not deeply connected with the earth. And so things get very dysregulated. And that's what causes a lot of our chronic diseases, cancer and otherwise, right? Not just cancer. So I'm not saying that, all of this needs to go away, but the place from which we live has to change. And that's really what the work that I do now is focused on, is how do we start to change the way that we live, the way that we relate to ourselves, the way that we relate to the earth, the way that we relate to each other, so that we can live from a place where we're not walking around diseased, needing to be on medication all the time, needing to go to a doctor all the time to get treatments. We're not meant to live like that. That's not normal. And, honestly, that's really what brought me into plant medicine to begin with, is because when I was in graduate school, I started suffering from really, really severe anxiety, depression. I was never diagnosed with like an autoimmune disease, but I had a lot of symptoms of that. Had a lot of symptoms of, severe hormone dysregulation. And it was difficult, by the time that I moved to California after I got my PhD, my life was very difficult. And I was, what I would call pretty high functioning, but I was not okay. And I had, been to Western doctors. They, of course, did nothing for me. I think this is the story that you hear over and over and over again, especially from women, is that, we experience these like truly debilitating symptoms to where it's like we can barely function. And we go to the doctor and they're like, "Meh, let's put you on some anxiety and antidepressant medications." Actually, the first time that I went to the doctor for this, they were like, "Well, maybe you have HIV." Like, I don't have HIV, trust me. And they just kept going down you probably have HIV route until I presented a clean STD test, that was like very recent. And it's just like, it's insane to me, right? Like, and I hear these stories from so many different people that have, experienced some of the same symptoms that I have experienced, where you go to the doctor and they're just like, they just try to tell you that it's not happening, or that it's being caused by something that's like completely outrageous, right? And then of course after that, the only thing that they had to offer me was anti-anxiety and antidepressant medications. And I tried taking those, and bad idea. For one thing, like, I'm very sensitive to anything anyway, and my whole livelihood was built on me being able to use my brain. And those medications, for me anyway, they made me like a zombie. And yeah, I felt better, as in that I didn't feel as much, but I couldn't do that. I was like, I can't take these. And so, by the time I moved to California, I was like, I really have to do something about this, because I cannot live like this. Like, it's not sustainable. It's just, I cannot. And so I'd actually heard about plant medicine in graduate school because I was reading books about like the sexual and behavioral evolution of humans. And one of these books I was reading mentioned the stoned ape theory, which, some of you may have heard of that. And it's really a theory around how certain entheogenic plants, mushrooms, may have helped with the brain development of humans, and may have contributed to some of the ways that we process things and we experience life, and we are, kind of in a different realm of consciousness than the rest of mammals. Yeah. And so, that theory kind of led me down this rabbit hole of reading more about psychedelic plants that, you can have these altered states of consciousness in. And so by the time I'd come to California, I kind of had like some understanding of these plants, from at least from reading. And I'd read a lot about how they helped trauma and they helped anxiety and they helped depression. And like I had a lot of childhood trauma, and that's honestly what was causing a lot of these symptoms, and I knew that. Um, that I had, I grew up in a household that was very abusive, that was very controlling, that, there was a lot of really not good things going on in the environment that I grew up in. And, that caused me to have all of these emotions, right? Anger, rage, grief, just so much that I was holding on to that had never been able to express, and that I was just holding. And of course, I didn't know that at the time. All I knew was that I was miserable and I had to do something because I couldn't live like that. And even though I didn't believe in all of like the shamanistic practices and the energy work and all of the other things that went into these plant medicine ceremonies, I went to ceremony because I believed in the plant and I believed in neuroplasticity. And, you know, from the first time that I went to ceremony, my entire reality just completely changed. And, it's not that my anxiety went away and my depression went away and, all of a sudden everything was magic, right? It wasn't like that at all. That definitely didn't happen. But what did happen was that, I did have a very deep psychedelic experience, which I would actually say was quite traumatic for me at the time. It was really like more than what I could handle. And it's not like, I'm still alive, right? Obviously I handled it, but it was not ideal. Wouldn't recommend it. It was really like way too much for me at the time. But what it did was it blew my perception of reality open. And I had been living in this reality, like I said, where nothing that I couldn't quantifiably measure and analyze, if I couldn't quantifiably measure and analyze it, it didn't exist. And that's the way that I lived. And it was safe, right? It made things safe for me. It made things easy to control, which, coming from the background that I did with the amount of trauma that I had, that's how I kept myself safe. And of course, it's an illusion of safety, right? It's not real. But I had embedded myself very deeply into a false reality where that was truth. And so all of that just got blown open. And, I am the kind of person that when I experience and witness things that challenge the beliefs that I hold, then I have to look at that. And I have to like take that into consideration. I can't just ignore it. That's part of me that is why I went into science and I love science, is because I love learning about the nature of what is, and not just, what makes me feel good, but really truly the nature of what is. And so when I had that first experience, yes, there was a lot of emotional processing. There was a lot of, like inner purging and healing that happened. But I would say like what it really did was it opened up my reality to where there was so much more than what I ever believed existed. And it put me on this path of like, okay, like I have to keep walking down this road and see where it leads, because what I'm experiencing in these ceremonies, it feels more real than my real life. And so there's something here that I need to understand more. There's something here that I need to, that I need to explore. And so, for me, like medicine is very strong. My experiences are always very strong. And it's not like I could just keep going back and sitting with medicine. That was just not something that I could do, that I could hold space for at that time. And so what I began doing to help integrate after I sat with medicine the first time, I started taking a 9-month shamanic initiation course, because there wasn't really like any real integration that was offered, but what was offered was, this shamanic training. And so I was like, okay, well, I need to do something to try to like integrate this experience and understand more deeply what it is that I'm working with here that I previously had no awareness of. And so I started, doing this shamanism training and, practicing and, engaging in this work. And yeah, it just opened so much for me. And even though it opened up so much for me, as far as being able to experience things that I didn't believe existed and really start to like experience things that felt magical, a lot of my very physical symptoms, they hadn't changed really. And I would say like my tangible reality had not changed. The way that I felt about certain things and the way that I believed that had started to change, but the physical hadn't started to change yet. And about, I'd say, 2.5 years into, sitting with these plant medicine ceremonies and practicing shamanism, that's when I began working with the body. And that's when I found somatic work. That's when I found embodiment work. And it wasn't something that I was looking for, it's something that like really came into my field without, it was unexpected, I guess. It was unexpected. And of course, just like everything else at that time, it came into me first because I started reading books about trauma. I think the first book I read was The Body Keeps the Score. And I know some people don't like that book because it's, a trigger for trauma and, if you've had traumatic experiences. I have my own opinions about that. I think the book is wonderful. It was, a really good, introduction for me into the world of research around somatics and, how important our body is in what it stores, what it remembers. And after I read that book, it's like it just so many things clicked what they were talking about, how early childhood experiences get stored in your body and they shape how you perceive reality and truly like how your reality, the reality that your lens comes through. And after that, it was like so much just started coming into my field around somatics, embodiment, and I started doing a lot of when I go into things, I go in deep. Those of you that know me, may know that about me. But yeah, so I really like kind of went strongly down this path of somatics and embodiment and started, exploring different types of somatic work, feminine embodiment work. And, for those of you that have done any of that kind of work, there's so many different types of that out there. And that just gets a label of somatic work or embodiment work put on it. It can mean like so many different things. And so I did, a lot of exploration in that. But what was crazy to me was that when I started doing that work, things started shifting in my life tangibly, like so quickly. I mean, within a few months, I was no longer working in my corporate VC job anymore. It was bananas, like how quickly things started to shift. And it wasn't like, I was like, oh, I'm going to quit and leave, right? Like I was actually planning to quit and leave, but not for another year. But it's like things in my reality just started to shift. And it was like everything that was not in alignment with who I was started to fall away. And never have I experienced anything like that. And it was so interesting because at the same time, even before I really started to understand the somatics and embodiment side of this stuff, I had been working with a structural integration body worker because I also have a lot of physical pain in my body, and I had that for years starting in graduate school. And what I noticed was when would go to her after I'd sat in ceremony, things would unwind so much more deeply. I would have these like really big unwinding processes. And I really started to it started to be made very clear to me the connection between the openness that the plant medicines give you and then actually physically working with the body while you have access to that openness. And so I started playing with that on my own. And, I noticed that when I was going to ceremonies, I could like really drop into my body and do this somatic work in my body on my own in the plant medicine ceremonies and really like move a lot of energy. It's not like, I was just laying there and the medicine was doing all the work. It started to be this collaboration of my awareness going in, and instead of just, having like early on, my plant medicine experiences were always very challenging. I'd say they still are pretty challenging. Like, I'm not like one of those people that's going to take mushrooms and like go to a music festival. Terrible idea for me. But it really, like, I was really starting to be shown that, when I was having these challenging experiences, if I would bring my awareness to that and make space for it and hold it and bring love and bring compassion and actually communicate with it and allow it to have expression and allow it to be seen and be witnessed and to be integrated back into my body, it was incredible. Right? Like, you can literally shift things that you've been carrying your whole life in a few hours like that. Like, it's bananas. It was just super, super crazy. And so when I started experiencing this, like that combination of the somatic work with the plant medicine, that's when I really started feeling like I needed to be holding ceremonies for people. For me, I never started serving plant medicine just to serve plant medicine. That's not my goal. That's never been my goal. It has always been to get people back into their bodies so that they can actually feel what's happening in their bodies and liberate these energies that have been stuck in forms that are really uncomfortable for a very long time, right? Forms that are trying to protect you from something that happened 40 years ago. Or possibly even something that happened to an ancestor, right? Because that's a real thing too, or something that happened in a parallel lifetime. There's so much of this that nobody ever tells us, right? That's like, and like the somatic stuff, the embodiment stuff, that is not woo-woo. There is so much research around that. And, it's not like we didn't know that before there was Western research. Indigenous people knew this. They knew how to work with the body. They lived in their body. But that was taken away when we began, basically when what we call colonization happened, right? When this mind virus of needing to be in control, having power over, right? Having ownership of land, ownership of people, ownership of the physical, instead of being in collaboration with it. That took away the ability to be in collaboration with our body, because it requires a different mindset, which the plant medicines also help with. The plant medicines really help with mindset and with seeing what's real and what's possible. So there's just like this beautiful synergy between working with the body, working with the earth, and working with these medicines to open up the mind, open up the neuroplasticity for more of this reprogramming. And it's just so powerful. It's so, so powerful. And that's what I'm really passionate about sharing with people. And I really do believe that if we can collectively begin living more in our bodies and listening to our bodies, collaborating with our bodies, that our collective reality is going to shift really quickly. Our bodies are a very intelligent piece of technology, and our mind is a part of our body, right? And it's like we've been taught that these two parts of ourselves need to be fighting and need to be in competition, and we see it all around us, right? We see it literally manifested all around us with all of the wars, all of the just everything that's going on, that we're all just like, what in the world, right? And this stuff has been going on for a very long time. It's just all being seen now. And it's coming up to be seen because it's all part of this process that we're collectively being asked to go through, where we do have to see what's within us. We do have to witness it. We do have to hold it with love and compassion. And we do have to help give it a path to integrate back into wholeness, to integrate back into its original form in this sacred piece of technology, so that we're not at war with ourselves. We're not fighting with ourselves. And, this is just, it's what I saw was missing in plant medicine ceremonies. These plant medicines, they're so powerful. They're such powerful teachers. But without embodiment, without being guided into our bodies, which, of course, like the indigenous tribes that have historically held these ceremonies, they live in their bodies because they live in a way that requires them to live in their bodies. They don't have all of this that we have in the Western world, where we can be totally disconnected from our bodies and like go to the grocery store and buy food and not know whether it comes off of a tree or out of the ground, or, they don't have all of this, right? And so it's not even like in their purview that this would be something that we need to do. But the reality is that most of the world lives in a way where we've been disconnected from our bodies and been disconnected from the earth. And so we have to bridge that gap. And if we can bridge that gap, things are going to get really good really quick. And so, that's the work that we do here. We let plant medicine open the door, but it's really the embodiment piece that allows you to walk through it and keep walking that path, even after the medicine wears off. Months after you've sat in medicine, years after you've sat in medicine. So that's really what we're all about here at Tree of Life. And so, the containers that we hold here, the group containers, they're 7 days long, they're a week long. And we sit with medicine 3 of those days, and 2 full days are integration. And, the integration part of that is, time on your own, but part of it is embodiment work. It is also interpersonal work. Being in group ceremonies is so powerful because you get the opportunity to actually interact with other people who are having a similar experience. And with having, days between ceremonies, having guided experiences where you can actually begin to see what it feels like to connect authentically to other people and express authentically and be witnessed in that and be received in that. It's amazing how many people don't actually have that and don't even know that they don't have it, right? We don't realize how many masks we wear in order to show up in a way that we think is going to be acceptable. And yeah, there's just so much there. There's so much to explore, but yeah, we have these really beautiful 7-day ceremonies in places that are comfortable, and that you can really relax and be held in. That's a really important part of the space that we hold, that we want it to be nourishing. And that doesn't just mean the food that's going into your bodies, but it means the energy that you're being held in. It means helping your body, not just your mind, to feel truly safe and held and taken care of. And allowing yourself to be in that container for a longer period of time. It makes it more real, and it takes it from being something that is just associated with being in medicine to something that is available for you to experience when you're in a grounded state also. And that's very important. It's very, very important to begin to reprogram ourselves to be in a state that's truly nourished outside of being in an altered state of consciousness, right? Because that's what the integration is. That's how we begin to ground this into our reality. And so, integration is the work. Taking medicine is easy, even though it doesn't always feel easy in the process. It's a relatively short process compared to your life. The integration is really the work. And, the body work is a part of this too. So all of our ceremonies, all of our group ceremonies, we have body workers come, and everyone has body work. Depending on the ceremony, we either have it with medicine or on an integration day, depending on what kind of medicine we're sitting with. But this too, physically having your body worked on, so important. And, I'll make more videos about this, but, it is really a transformational process having your body worked on in medicine. And then, even after you go home, if you can have body work done after you go home, there's so much more that's ready to be released, that is ready to be processed right after ceremony when you're open. So there's just so much more in this world of plant medicine that is available if we're willing to go there, right? If we're willing to put the time and the effort in for ourselves. And yeah, that's what we're really passionate about, bringing people here at Tree of Life. So if any of this resonates with you, definitely subscribe to our channel. We're going to be making a lot more of these types of videos, just talking more about, the experiences that we have had and what we've seen, and what we believe is most powerful, and how you can like really help yourself through these experiences, with plant medicine or not. You don't have to have plant medicine to be embodied, but it makes the process a lot more efficient, and it helps to reprogram these fundamental mind errors that most of us have had embedded within us. And so it is helpful in that way, but it's not for everybody. But if any of this resonates with you, subscribe to our channel. I'm going to put a few links in the caption below to where you can also subscribe to our email newsletter. And also take a look at the ceremonies coming up and the offerings that we have. So enjoy that, and I will see you all soon.